So, as we have been doing, this is our 7th class in Tomer Devorah. We are on the 6th midah, the 6th attribute or character trait of God that we are studying out of the 13 attributes of mercy. I saw something interesting, and we're going to come hopefully full circle back to this idea at the end of the class. But I was studying Duties of the Heart by Bachya, and at the end of the gate on trust in God, all the way at the end, where he describes what trust in God actually looks like, what it feels like, what the benefits are, the arguments for why God is deserving of our trust. At the end, he has 7 things that hold a person back from being able to trust God. And one of the 7 is a lack of understanding of who God is. And I'm sure that we've heard this line before. I just read this in a book attached. Excellent book by Rabbi Danishevsky. He's a practicing clinical counselor. And he writes about, he met a chaplain in a Catholic school system. And he was recognized as the most successful chaplain in the school system. And what he would do, every time he would meet new students, incoming 9th graders, he would ask them, what are your difficulties, what are your struggles, challenges in faith? And many of them would answer, oh, I have no challenges, I'm good, I have total faith and belief in God. And to those students he would say, I'm very worried about you. Because real faith in God comes with struggle and questions. And he was the most successful, because that would open them up, because everyone has questions. Everyone has struggles. And one of the biggest roadblocks to being able to trust God is the misconceptions that we hold on to about who God is. There's someone that I know, he was an atheist until he was about 40. And he likes to say that the God he didn't believe in when he was 40, he still doesn't believe in. And it was only as he started studying books like Maimonides and Duties of the Heart and Kuzari, these early philosophical works where he started to understand what the Jewish belief is, who is God actually, and as much as a human being can understand that and can relate to it, that was when he made that shift from atheism to believing. So that God that he didn't believe in, I don't believe in. I heard Rabbi Sharf actually use the same line recently. He gets that with his bar and bat mitzvah students sometimes, where they'll come into his office and say, I'm supposed to study for my bar or bat mitzvah. I don't believe in God. And he'll say to them, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. Right? So last month we studied midah number 5. And again, midah, which we loosely translate as character trait, really means measurement. And that important distinction and translation came very much into play in the midah that we learned last month. Last month's midah in Hebrew was lo hachzik la'ad apo, which means in English, he does not persist in his wrath forever. God does not hold on to his anger forever. And so why is it important that we understand the Jewish word for character trait is midah, because it's all about balance. It's all about finding the right measurement. We don't really believe that anything is inherently good or evil in this world. It's about what you choose to use it for, or the balance that you have, the balance that you find within these things. For example, if you look at Germany pre-World War II, they were the epitome of culture, of sophistication, of manners, of punctuality, of precision. And then they took that very attribute and went off the rails way too intense. Anyone who doesn't fit the system, anyone who is in their definition deformed, you're out, right? So it's about measurement, it's about midah, it's about finding balance. The same idea we find in the Torah, when the Torah talks about, and I've used this example before in this class, when the Torah talks about the immoral sexual relationship between a brother and a sister. So the Torah prohibits it, and it says, it uses the expression ki chesed hu, because it is a kindness. Chesed usually we translate as kindness. What does the Torah mean when it says that that immoral relationship is chesed? And the answer is because the greatest kindness that there is potential for is in that relationship between husband and wife. You have potential to create a new human being. You have potential to care for each other. It is the hardest relationship, potentially. It's easy when I can go home and say goodbye to you to be nice for a few minutes at a time. But what about when I go home and you're still there, right? What about when I go home and I just need to be alone and my room is your room, right? It's not easy. So that is where there's unbelievable potential for chesed, for kindness. However, if there's no boundaries, if there's no limits, if there's no guide, if there's no measure, then that relationship can spill out into inappropriate places. Right? So that's the idea where the Torah uses the same word. So last month we talked about God's attribute, God's midah of lo hechsek la'ad apo. And again, these 13 attributes of mercy are the 13 attributes that the prophets saw about God and which we use on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But this is the higher form. So the wording that we find, that we're studying, is not the same wording that we'll use on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. On the high holidays, the wording that we use is the lower level. We're begging for mercy because we've made some mistakes over the course of the year. But the highest level of those 13 attributes which has been revealed to us, that's what we're striving to emulate. So that's what we're studying here. And God doesn't hold on to his anger forever. What does this mean? It means that if you get to the point, or if no one in this room, but if theoretically God gets to the point of anger, he doesn't hold on to that anger forever. The only reason why God gets angry or acts with anger is because there's potential that will wake somebody up to return to the proper path. Welcome, welcome. There's potential that will bring the person back. When people are, as the expression goes, there's no atheist in the foxhole, right? When a person is really shaken up, and you can talk to our good friend Jordan Disney. He spoke about this on Shavuot when we had a panel about people talking about challenges that they went through, and he said it's very true. He worked in he was in heavy artillery, special ops, and everyone's muttering something under their breath as they're being tossed out of an airplane, right, to go towards whatever mission it is that they're heading towards. So God only gets angry to shake us up, to wake us up and hopefully bring us back to him. But if he sees that anger will not accomplish that, then he cools his anger. And the example that the Tomer Devorah, our author, the Ramak, brings is the generation of Yeravam. Yeravam in Tanakh, if you study the stories of the Jewish kings, unfortunately, it's every few generations you have a good king. Okay, the vast majority of the kings led the Jewish people towards idol worship, towards immoral society. Not a very good chapter in our history, and it's a topic for another time. What exactly was God's plan over there, right? But so you look at the generation of Yeravam; they were idol worshippers. They were as far as it gets, seemingly, from God, and yet God gave Yeravam the ability to reconquer much of the land of Israel, which in previous generations they had lost. And they had lost, the prophets were screaming at us, during those generations, we lost those parts of Israel because we were sinning. And God was showing us, you don't deserve to have Israel anymore. You were given the land of Israel so that you could be a light to the nations. You're not doing it, you're going to lose it. And then in the generation of Yeravam, they didn't get any better, and yet he was victorious in war. And the Ramak points out the reason for this was because God saw in his generation that they were so far gone to the point that continuing to punish them, so to speak, was not going to help them come back to him. So, in today's world and generation, I rarely see that the anger or being stern or punishment is very effective in bringing people, and certainly children, back to where we want them to be. And I can't speak to previous generations because I wasn't there, But I don't know that, I find it hard to believe that in previous generations it worked very well either. Maybe they felt pressure, they felt guilt. But what you've seen is, as we are no longer confined by ghettos and we're welcomed into society, those children who are raised in that way tend not to hold on to their Judaism for very long, right? And so we find in the Torah, we find this mitzvah, which is, again, what we talked about. It wasn't last month, it was 2 months ago. We were off, I think, last month. But we find in the Torah a mitzvah. It says that if you see your friend and your enemy, and their donkeys, both of them, their donkeys are overloaded and have collapsed, you must help your enemy first. Now, this is a very beautiful idea, but it gets more powerful when you think about who is this enemy that the Torah is talking about. The Torah teaches us you are not allowed to hate your fellow man. So who is this enemy that the Torah is referring to? The only person you're allowed to hate is someone who is a willful, intentional, rebellious sinner. That is the only person that the Torah gives us permission to hate. And that's the enemy that the Torah says you must go over to that person and help him first. Why? Because again, this idea that the hatred clearly has not brought this person back, but maybe you show a little love to this person, you show them some kindness, maybe that will actually bring them back. Maybe that will bring them in the fold. And the last point that we talked about last month, and this is also a fascinating topic for me, is what is Judaism's view about anger in general? This is a little bit of a tangent from the curriculum, so to speak, of the book. Ramak doesn't talk about it, but it's very interesting because I think that typically when you study Jewish texts, anger is a terrible, terrible thing to allow yourself to experience. The Talmud says one who becomes enraged has filled their soul with vomit. That's how the Talmud talks about it. However, there's a little bit of a difficulty with that, which is we're describing God as getting angry. So if it's so bad, if it's so terrible to get angry, then how can God himself be described as being angry? So some like to say, well, God doesn't really experience human emotion because he's infinite, and there's truth to that. And so it just means that God acts like he's angry. But in as much as that's true, we cannot relate to the emotions of God. We do know that God, in his way, again, which we can't understand, does feel. We know he loves us. We know that he feels all sorts of things that the Torah describes. So Rambam writes, Maimonides writes when he describes anger, and he also says very terrible things about anger. He says, though, you have to find balance like everything else, and you should not be, in modern terms, an emotionless robot. And he describes that as the opposite of one who has too much rage. Now, maybe I would have thought to say, if I get rid of anger, I can still have emotions. I can still be an emotional, sensitive type of person. I just don't get angry. But Rambam says, no, that's not how it works. If you cut off all anger, you're basically cutting off your emotions. You're cutting off all your passion. The difference, I think, the important distinction is who is in the driver's seat. Is the emotion in the driver's seat, or are you in the driver's seat? If you're enraged to the point where you're out of control, that's the thing where I think that the sages talk very derogatorily about someone who allows themselves to get to that point where they're out of control. But to feel anger and to express it in an appropriate way, I don't think that we would want to be able to watch someone commit an atrocity and not get angry about it. It means you don't care, right? We wouldn't want that someone can bully our children and we wouldn't care. That doesn't feel like the appropriate response. People don't want, if someone that they love passes away, they don't want the grief to go away. Yes, sometimes it's crippling, it feels too heavy, it feels too much, but you wouldn't want the next day to be able to wake up and just go around just as happy as you were yesterday, right? So again, the concept of midah, of measure, of balance, is very, very important. In regards to leaders, the Rambam, Maimonides, and others write that a leader can pretend to be angry in order to get the congregation or the children or whoever it is that they're leading to get them in shape, right? So when a person reaches the level where they know how to only act like they're angry, but they don't feel anger at all, then you're allowed to use that as a tool. So I'll let you know when I get there. Okay, Lloyd, you ready?
Ready.
Excellent. Okay, so that was last month. Now let's begin our topic for this month. The topic for this month, Midah number 6, Chafetz Chesed, which means that God loves and desires kindness. God loves and desires kindness. There is a fascinating story brought in Yechezkel. The Beis Hamikdash, the temple, was going to be destroyed. In fact, the Jewish people themselves were going to be destroyed. And God says to the angel Gabriel, go and take a handful of ashes from between the keruvim, the cherubs. Take a handful of ashes and throw it down onto the city of Jerusalem. And as we've discussed in the past, the way that God interacts with this world is through levels of spiritual worlds. Okay? So whatever happens on those higher spiritual worlds, that is a strong indicator of what's going to be happening next here. And so the idea of taking ashes and throwing it onto Jerusalem was a statement that everything about the Jewish people is going to be totally and absolutely destroyed. And Gabriel goes to grab some ashes from between the cherubs, from between the keruvim, right? These are the two angelic, I guess we can call it statues, that rest on top of the Aron, the ark, which is in the Holy of Holies. And Gabriel reaches to grab some ashes, and he finds that there is a hand that is rested, that is there between these angelic forms. And so before he can grab the ashes, this hand had to reach and grab the ashes first. Then he grabbed the ashes from the hand. And the sages teach us that what this story is telling us, there was a hand there, meaning that there were still those in the Jewish people who performed chesed, who performed acts of kindness. And so instead of Gabriel being able to grab the burning hot coals, they were cooled down first by this hand of kindness, which grabbed and held those ashes first, cooled them off before he grabbed them. And then because Gabriel saw that there was this hand, he waited 6 years before he threw the ashes. And so again, the ashes cooled down before he threw them on Jerusalem. And so ultimately what resulted was that the infrastructure of Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Jewish people were kicked out of the land of Israel, but the people were not destroyed themselves. In other words, the Jewish people reached a point of distance from God, of sin, that they should have been totally and absolutely destroyed. And what saved them was the fact that there were still those amongst the Jewish people who acted with kindness, who acted with chesed. There's a story in the Talmud. I'm skipping a little bit, but there's a story in the Talmud. And I think that this brings out the idea that we're talking about today. Rav Chia used to buy gifts for his wife anytime he had the opportunity. So it seems very sweet, seems very romantic. And his students challenged him on this. And they said, why in the world do you do this? His wife would publicly humiliate him and intentionally antagonize him every opportunity that she had. Okay? She did not seem to be the most wonderful of people. And so his students challenged him, what's the deal? Why do you seemingly shower her with so much gifts and love when she antagonizes you so much? And Rabbi Chia said, and by the way, we'll get a little deeper into the answer, but Rabbi Chia said, if all that she did was to raise our children and to protect me from sin, then she would be deserving of everything that I do for her. Now, we don't actually know what went on behind the scenes, but he said if all that she did was, because remember in those days, women weren't able to go to work. So the women were home, they were taking care of the home, they were raising the children. And if all that she did was, she raised the children and she protected me from sin because he has a wife, that would be enough. If a person has some attribute of chesed, of kindness to them, certainly if it's directed towards you, like in the story of Rabbi Chia, that has to totally and absolutely change the attitude and the perspective with which you relate to this person. The story with Yechezkel, where God tells Gabriel to grab the ashes, what it's saying is that God changed his entire perspective, his entire attitude, in the way that he looked at us, in the way that he judged us, because of this kindness that some of the Jewish people acted with. This is a very, very difficult midah, very difficult attribute to emulate of God. What we're saying is, someone who has wronged you, someone who has all sorts of character traits that drive you nuts, but if you can see in them that in some way or form they act with kindness, that has to totally change the way that you relate and the way that you look at this person. So it's an amazing thing. We see that God loves kindness so much, it almost blinds him to seeing the rest of a person or the rest of a nation. If a nation is acting with kindness, he will ignore basically everything else. And we see this idea in two major places within Jewish teachings, in addition to this. The first is the difference between the generation of the flood and the generation of the tower. I didn't bring my laptop, so I don't remember what the order is supposed to be. Okay. The generation of the flood and the generation of the tower. So if you remember, in the story of Noah and the story of Noah, what was the punishment to the entire generation? The entire generation is killed through a flood. Why? Anybody know what was so bad about them?
They were wicked.
They were horribly wicked. What specifically made them so wicked? Murder. Idol worship. Sexual misconduct. So here's the fascinating thing. We know that they were idol worshippers. We know that they were having immoral relations. But what the Torah says is that the generation was full of chamas. What's chamas? Which is the same word as Hamas, yes. What is chamas? What is chamas? Chamas is theft. Theft. But it's theft that is so small that in a court of law, they cannot force you to pay back. If I steal a penny from you, you cannot take me to court and demand that I pay you back. It's a waste of everybody's time. If I steal one splinter from your fence, you cannot take me to court, right? But what would happen in this generation was, I would build a new fence, and every single person in the neighborhood would take one splinter until the next day I had no fence left. But who do I take to court for stealing my fence? There's nothing left. Okay? That is what the Torah does. So we know that they were idol worshippers. They were having sexual, immoral relations. But the Torah describes, you know why they were killed? Because of their theft. Fast forward 10 generations. We don't last very long in humanity without messing up royally. Okay? Fast forward 10 generations. And the entire, well, not the entire humanity, but a significant portion of humanity gathers together to build a tower. To do what? To reach God. Why? Because we love him so much? No, because we don't want him. We are going to fight him. We are going to destroy him. We are going to overcome him. Open, active rebellion against God. What's the punishment to the generation of the tower? They can't talk to each other. God strikes down the tower and gives each of them a different language so they can no longer communicate with each other. So it's wild. You think about this for a second. A generation that steals pennies from each other, God kills them all. But the generation that has an active rebellion and they devote all their resources to fighting him, and he gives them a little pat on the head and says, go play somewhere else. Right? God can't tolerate when we fight with each other. He can tolerate when we fight him. He can handle that. He can handle when we're angry with him. He can handle when we rebel against him, but we fight with each other. We're lacking chesed, we're lacking kindness, loving kindness towards each other. The first and the second temple were destroyed for very different reasons. So Jewish people entered the land of Israel. Several generations later, Solomon builds the first temple. The temple is ultimately destroyed. Anyone know why the first temple is destroyed? That's how it was destroyed, correct? What were the sins that the Jewish people were guilty of that the temple was destroyed? Idolatry, adultery, right? The big stuff. We're exiled for 70 years, and then after the Purim story, Esther has a son, Daryavish, who then sends the Jewish people back to Israel to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, to rebuild another temple. That temple is destroyed, and we're still in exile now, 2,500 years later. Why? Why was that temple destroyed? Sinat Chinam. Baseless hatred. Baseless hatred, which the Talmud says culminated with the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Anyone heard the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? So the names sound very similar. And there was a wealthy individual who was friends with one of them and enemies with the other. And he told his servant to invite the friend, and he invited the enemy. And we're going to skip through all the details, but long story short, he has this guy, he comes to the party thinking, wow, apparently he likes me. Nope, it was a mistake. He throws him out on his face. The rabbis of the generation were sitting there and didn't say a word. He goes back to the Roman government, snitches on the Jewish people. And again, that whole story can be a series of classes in and of itself. But the entire Jewish people were culpable in that moment, in that story, and it was a revelation of where the Jewish people were holding. That something like that could happen, and even the rabbis didn't speak up. Nobody at the party, not the rabbis, nobody said anything. No one had any problem with this behavior. So again, we see terrible sin, but if you're holding on to chesed, if you're holding on to kindness, if you still act with loving kindness, it changes, it almost blinds God to who you truly are if you still act with kindness. But no kindness, no chesed, even if you study Torah, even if you pray, you serve God, you're in trouble. So, I printed here an article. A rabbi of mine, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, unfortunately he passed away this year. He was, for the last 5 years, he was the executive vice president of the OU, of the Orthodox Union. Before that, he was a rabbi in Baltimore, Maryland for many years, for several decades. And he wrote a powerful piece around the high holidays. And in it, he included a section about a great rabbi, a very righteous man, Rabbi Aryeh Levine. So Rabbi Aryeh Levine, he was born March 22nd, 1885. He lived until 1969. And he was an Orthodox rabbi who became the father of prisoners. And this rabbi, for many years, he used to go to the prisons and to visit the Jews or non-Jews who were there. And this was when Israel was still under the British Empire, right, under the British mandate. And after several years of doing this, Rabbi Cook, who was the chief rabbi of Israel, asked him if he could appoint him as the official chaplain of the Jewish prison system, and he accepted only on condition that he wouldn't get paid. Okay, so this was Rabbi Aryeh Levine, and this was something that he used to do. And how did it start? So it started because one time he went to visit the Western Wall to pray, and so Rabbi Levine went to the hospital to visit this child. He couldn't imagine that this child is going to be left there alone. And he walks into the hospital, And the entire room burst into tears because it had been years since they had seen anyone from the outside world. No one ever came to visit them because of the fear of catching this disease, which nobody really understood what it was. And so from then on, Rabbi Levine used to walk. Every Friday night, he would go to visit the people in this hospital at potential great risk to himself. But how could it be that these people would be left by themselves forever? And then he started visiting all of the prison systems. And there's one young man who relates, Yaakov Kotik. He was an underground fighter who was imprisoned at the Russian compound prison and was sentenced to death. And he went to visit this prisoner. And he relates how Rabbi Levine came and he said, there is no way. And Rabbi Levine just had this unbelievable faith, this absolute unbelievable faith. And he would not leave until he felt that Yaakov also believed that he would live. And that change in mentality and belief, going from absolute despair and depression, knowing that he was going to be put to death so soon, to somehow the rabbi's faith was contagious. And he believed somehow, miraculously, he wouldn't die. And a few days later, the court actually sentenced him to life imprisonment instead of to death. And years later, he actually got out. And all of the prisoners relate how he would walk in. Every Friday night, he would walk into the prison, and he'd look around the room to see if there was anybody new. And if there was anyone new, he would go over and he would hold their hand, this older rabbi, and he would rub their hand. And he would comfort them, and he would talk to them, and he would show them that they were human. And this was Rabbi Ari Levine. And you have to understand, it was a greatness. Each of these people related about how it just totally changed their life and their existence. And he did it every single week for years and years and years. And this is not one of those acts of kindness that you're going to become world-renowned, respected. He did after he passed away. But it's not a prestigious position. He didn't open some yeshiva and he has thousands of students who come to hear his words of Torah. He's walking by himself for hours every week to visit people that no one will ever really know the extent of what he's doing. There's no return for the favor of what he's doing. I like always to balance these type of stories about our greats with quote-unquote a regular Jew. There's no such thing as a regular Jew, but I like to balance because people, that's for the rabbis. So I heard a story from a man named David Ben Susan. And the fact that he used to do this is amazing, but the end of the story is even more incredible. He said when his children were in school, in the first days, weeks of school, he had a question that he used to always ask his children. And he would ask them, aside from how do you like your new teacher and how is school going and so on, is there anybody in the class that doesn't have a friend? Because often, especially in high school, you have these cliques that form, and then that's it. Someone's left out of, they don't have any clique, and they have no friends, maybe for an entire year, maybe for the entire high school experience. And we all can look back on our high school years and realize how small and short and insignificant they are, but it actually really changes the trajectory of a person's life. You know, how they think about themselves, if they believe in themselves, what they try to accomplish in their career. So he used to ask his kids, is there anybody that doesn't have a clique, that doesn't seem to have any friends? And one year, one of his daughters in 9th grade said, yeah, there is a girl. There's a girl, her name is Sarah, and nobody's friends with her. And he says, great, I want you to invite her tomorrow to do homework with you. And she's like, Dad, no way. And he says, yes way. And she's like, no way. And you can imagine how this argument went back and forth, right, with a teenage girl who is determined to be part of the cool kids, and she's not going to be the one that invites this social outcast. Finally, somehow he convinces her that she's going to invite her to come do homework at their house. And his daughter says to him, you know, but Dad, she smells. He's like, what? She smells. What do you mean? What do you mean? You heard me. She smells. People are not friends with her. In this case, there was something off about her. She was smelly. She was very smelly. There was something not quite right. Okay, So they invite her. This girl, Sarah, comes over the next day to do homework. And it's true. She smells, and she looks totally unput together. She's dressed in a very haphazard, strange way. But the look on her face as she walks into this house, and you can tell she has never been invited anywhere before. And you can see it has made her day, her week, her year. Someone finally noticed her and invited her over and wanted to hang out with her. And so they go, they do homework together, and the parents end up talking to this girl, Sarah, and it turns out, conversation leads until they find out she lives in a very, very dysfunctional home. And there aren't really any parents at home able to take care of her, to provide for her. She's been basically raising herself all these years. She doesn't know the basics of hygiene. She doesn't know how to dress herself. She doesn't have anybody to look out or to care for her. And so the Ben Susan went on a family trip the next day to the mall, which was unexpected and unplanned. But all they needed was a credit card and a car. And the girls were off to go shopping. And they took Sarah to go shopping. And by the end of that year, for the end of the year show, this girl was chosen by the class to be the head of dance for the performance, which, as you can imagine, in those type of circles, that means she had become like Miss Popular, right? Misrespected. And all it took was one brilliant father to ask his children, is there anyone who's not being invited? Is there anyone who's not being noticed? Is there anyone who doesn't have a friend? And this is not Rabbi Aryeh Levine, who had a heart bigger than any of us can imagine. This is a quote-unquote regular Jew, a regular Jew who had a little bit of sensitivity, and he changed someone's life forever. We can all do that. We can all do that. Think to ourselves, is there anybody in our social circles, anyone who comes to the J, comes to our synagogue, any of the places that we like to go, that we notice often doesn't have someone to talk to, doesn't get the invites. And by the way, I'll tell you something personal. When I was in 12th grade, I thought that I was that guy. Okay? I thought I was the guy who wasn't getting any invites. All my friends, all the guys in my class are out partying, and nobody thinks to invite me. So one Saturday night, I'm like, you know what? Enough of the self-pity. I'm going to invite some people. And I bought some pizza, pulled out some board games, which is like super nerdy for a 12th grade boy, okay? And you know what happened? The entire class showed up. The entire class showed up because guess what? They were all sitting at home thinking the same thing. I'm the one who's left out, and everyone else is having a good time. And guess what? No one was having a good time. Everyone was sitting bored at home. Okay? So a lot of times we feel like we're doing them a favor. You're doing yourself a favor by going over. And a lot of times we feel like we're being excluded. We're not actually being excluded. Everyone's being excluded. Everyone likes to put on this show that we've got it all under control. We all have our big social circle. Everything is good. Everyone's doing well, right? You take that first step. You be vulnerable for a second, and you find out everyone's in the same boat. Yeah?
That's for every mitzvah. You feel better about yourself than the person you're doing good for.
Lloyd, don't tell my secrets. Don't share the secrets. It's true, absolutely. When you give, it is the ultimate experience. And by the way, it's a fascinating thing how good we feel when we give, right? It ties back into the topic today. God's midah, God's attribute, ki chafetz chesed hu. He desires kindness. So much does he desire kindness, it blinds him seemingly to other things. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that attribute? What about truth? What about justice? I mean, there's so many good attributes that we want to have, that we want to emulate. Why is kindness the one?
I think it's all encompassing.
It's all-encompassing in terms of how we interact with other people. Absolutely. But there are other attributes which maybe you could argue, right? Truth, being truthful, having integrity. We find, by the way, there are countless sources. I mean, literally countless sources that talk about this idea and show the value that God has for kindness. But we see also with our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, each one embodied a specific character trait, a specific attribute. Abraham was kindness, obviously, right? All the stories about Abraham are about his kindness. Isaac is service. And Jacob is truthfulness, Torah, or some say a combination of kindness and service. Okay? But the first it's not a coincidence. The first had to be chesed. The first had to be kindness. The foundation, which everything else can be built upon, had to be Abraham. It had to be the kindness. That one had to come first. We find another thing. In the Talmud in Yevamos, Tractate Yevamos 79a, it says, the definition of what it means to be part of the Jewish people, there are 3 character traits that define being Jewish. Being stubborn, no, I'm kidding. Rachmanim, they're merciful. Baishanim, they have embarrassment, and we'll explain what that means in a second. V'gomlei chasadim, and they are people who act with kindness. The 3 defining characteristics. Now, maybe not every Jew has these, but the defining characteristic of really being a Jew is having mercy, having embarrassment, and being one who is full of loving kindness. What does it mean to be baishanim? By the way, this one is very interesting. I have a slide here somewhere that has it. Here we go. It's translated in the middle as modesty. That's not really a correct translation for baishanim. To be a baishan means to be embarrassed. Why is being embarrassed a fundamental attribute of being a Jew? So yesterday, in the Shabbos Cafe, 8:30 a.m. I have to get a plug in there somewhere for my other classes, right? So 8:30 a.m. Saturday morning, Shabbos Cafe with lots of iced coffee. We talk about tefillah. We talk about the prayers. And one of the prayers that we ask in the morning is, protect us, God, from the azei panim, from the brazen-faced. What does the brazen-faced mean? So Rabbi Schwab explains. Those who are brazen are those who don't value, give significance, appreciate the image of God that is within every single human being. The brazen-faced. And then we ask God to protect us from being brazen-faced. We want to be protected from those who act that way, and we don't want to certainly act that way ourselves. So baishan, someone who has embarrassment, it means someone who has a sensitivity. You're not brazen. You're not willing to disgrace God's image in other people, the divinity that is within every other person. So these are the 3 attributes that define being a Jewish person. The Talmud in Sukkah, and this is going to be my last source for this topic, because again, you can bring countless sources, but I think at a certain point it takes away from the conversation. The Talmud there says that Gemilos Chasadim, charity is actually, not charity, acts of kindness is far greater than charity, even charity. Acts of kindness are greater even than charity in 3 ways. Number 1, because acts of kindness you can do with your physical body. You don't have to have money to do charity. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to give money. You can do it with your very being. Give time, give attention to somebody. In any way, with your body, you can perform kindness to someone else. Number 2, charity is only to poor, but acts of kindness are to everyone. And number 3 is that charity is only to the living, but kindness can be done even to those who have passed. There are ways that you can do kindness to those who have passed. You can continue doing mitzvot and have in mind that this should be in honor of the deceased. The burial service, the entire process of that is an act of kindness that will never be repaid. But more than that, fundamentally, kindness is far greater than charity. Because even within charity, the Talmud tells us that higher than charity, so if a person gives money to somebody as charity, it's an unbelievable mitzvah. If you don't know who you're giving to, so let's say like someone makes a donation to the rabbi's discretionary fund and I give it to somebody else. They don't know who they gave to. That's an even higher form of charity. If the receiver doesn't know where the money came from, you slip an envelope under their door, or find some way to give them a gift that they don't even realize they're receiving charity, that's even higher than that. Higher still is if you give them a loan that they have to pay back. Really? Isn't it greater if I give it to them and I never have to take back? And higher than that is if you set them on their own 2 feet. You offer someone a job, that is the highest form of charity. And the reason is because an act of kindness where they can set themselves up, where they don't feel embarrassed, they don't feel like they had to take charity, is so much more powerful. Right? Rabbi Pesach Krohn relates about when his father passed away when he was 18 years old. He was the oldest of 5 children, and now he had to basically find a way to support his entire household. And there was somebody in the shul, someone in his synagogue, who came over to him and gave him I think he gave him like $1,800, which in those days was it's a significant amount of money now, but it was a very significant amount of money at that time. And he wouldn't take it because he wouldn't take charity. And the man said, "You must take this. This is not charity. This is an investment. You're a very bright young man. I believe that you'll have a great future. And in a few years, once you're making it big, you'll pay me back with interest." Okay? So with that introduction, he took the money. Fast forward a few years later, I think it took 10 years until he finally got the money back together. And he went back to the man to pay him back. And the man said, "What is this?" He said, "You told me 10 years ago that I have a loan." He said, "Yes, I remember what you're talking about. Yes, you must pay that money back, but not to me. Find someone who is in your position and pass it on to them." And Rabbi Krohn followed this chain of money, and it's still going till today. This loan that never gets paid back to the giver, but gets pushed forward onto someone else. But the person receiving it feels so good because I'm going to pay you back. It's not a loan. It's not charity. It's a loan. Why is this? Why is chesed so unbelievably desirable to Hashem? And this is the last thing that I want to talk about today. Why is kindness so important? Why is this the midah? Why is this the attribute that is so important to Hashem? So Debbie said because it's all-encompassing in our relationships with each other. What else? Why would you guys say chesed, kindness, is so important? Why is it seemingly more important than faith in God?
It can be healing.
It certainly is healing.
It can do a lot of things.
It's very, very powerful.
I feel it's so asserting.
It's a few pieces there, but kindness is one of those things that it changes who you are as you do it, and it makes you more godly. But you're getting deeper into the issue. But again, shouldn't there be any form of emulation of God? We've had so many attributes that we've studied. We've studied already 6 attributes. Shouldn't it be that if I emulate any of those, that I come close to God, that God loves me? So I want to take that idea, Abby, that you said one step further. We see by how important this is to God, even though we can never truly understand God, and God is one, which means that He's unified. He is unity, which means, bear with me, we're going to get a little philosophical. He doesn't really have different attributes. We describe different attributes to Him. We describe seemingly different attributes means different parts to God. Because that's how we as human beings can relate to the infinite. We can't relate to the infinite, so we break it down to finite that we can kind of try to relate to. But in as much as we can understand God, we see that chesed, kindness, is of utmost importance, which means that it is at the core of God Himself. Kindness, more than any other attribute, is at the core of what God is. So if you emulate that, it's overpowering and overshadows other things that a person, maybe negative things that a person might contain within themselves. We started at the beginning of the class a reference from Duties of the Heart. That one of the biggest barriers to be able to trust God is not understanding who God is. Now, we all have life experiences that teach us that God is not infinite love and kindness. We study history, and it teaches us that God is not infinite love and kindness. If you believe in that God, if you learn that lesson, which is understandable, and we pretty much all of us learn that lesson at some point in our life, it's a false lesson. You learn that lesson, you will not be able to connect with God. You will not be able to trust God. You will live with incredible anxiety and fear in your life. And we all do. And if you live with heightened anxiety, you're normal, because if you study the statistics today, having increased or even clinical levels of anxiety, unfortunately, has become normal today. I'm certainly not casting judgment, and I'm talking about myself. I'm not talking about anybody else. But if that's the lesson you learn in your life and in history, you can't trust God. The lesson of this midah, ki chafetz chesed hu, how much God loves kindness. Not only do we have to try and find a way to see other people in a more positive light, if they are people that do kindness, even if they're rough around the edges. I'll finish with one last story that I just remembered. I didn't plan to share this story. Okay? I'll finish one last. But that's one point of this midah. But the other point is, this is who God is. And I have to challenge myself. And if I have questions about this, I have to ask those questions. And I have to search. And I have to scratch at it. Because if the God that I'm connecting with and the God that I relate to is not fundamentally and at his core all about love and kindness, I'm not connecting with God. I'll tell you a story. It's not about God, it's about human beings and how we should view human beings. I have a friend who he viewed himself as a businessman. And he bought a product at a very, very low price. He thought that he was going to make it rich. He bought thousands and thousands of this product. And he got stuck with it. Nobody wanted to buy it. He couldn't flip it. So he called every person in the industry that he knew to see if they wanted to buy it, at least to break even, so he wouldn't lose money. And everyone was so nice to him on the phone. Wow, good for you, you got in on that deal. Right now, I don't think that I need any of that, but and everyone was very polite, and nobody bought a single thing. And then he called one of his Jewish business friends. Okay? And this guy ripped him apart. What is wrong with you, you idiot? You wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you're never going to get it back? And he hung up the phone. And he sits there feeling terrible. He's like, you think I don't know that? My entire life savings is out, and I'm trying to figure it out. Like, why are you chewing me out? I don't need this for. A few hours later, this guy who chewed him out, this Jew, calls him back, and he says, I found someone to buy your entire stock. Because, yeah, this Jew was rough around the edges, and he shouldn't have talked that way. But at the end of the day, he cared. He loved. He took responsibility. Right? We have to find a way to see that in each other, even when maybe we are rough around the edges or we don't appreciate something about somebody else. Okay? As always, a pleasure studying with all of you, and I look forward to next month. And please don't send me home with any cookies.